Welcome to this video on IELTS Academic Writing Task 1. Today, we will cover essential vocabulary for describing trends in charts and graphs to help improve your writing. First, we have peaked at. Use this term to describe when a figure reaches its highest point on a line or bar chart. For example, sales peaked at 2,000 units in July. Next is fluctuated. This word describes an irregular, up and down trend. You might say, prices fluctuated between $10 and $20 all year. When you need to describe a sudden, large increase, use the phrase, a sharp rise. For example, there was a sharp rise in tourism after 2015. If a trend stops changing after a period of growth, it has plateaued. An example would be, growth plateaued at around 5% in 2018. To describe a fast and steep drop, use the word plummeted. You could write, the number plummeted to just 50 in March. When something rises gradually and consistently, you can say it steadily increased. For instance, enrollment steadily increased over 5 years. Use the word dipped to describe a small, temporary drop in a trend. For example, sales dipped in March, but recovered in April. When a figure stays at the same level without changing, we say it, remained stable. For example, the figure remained stable throughout the period. Use overtook when one figure surpasses another. For example, car production overtook bike production in 2010. A dramatic fall refers to a very large and noticeable decrease. Use this term to describe a steep or significant drop. For example, there was a dramatic fall in attendance after 2019. When something has surged, it means it has risen suddenly and powerfully. Use this when describing a fast, strong increase, such as, demand for electricity surged in the summer. To say that something dropped slightly means it fell by a small amount. This is useful for describing a minor decrease, like, interest in the topic dropped slightly after 2018. Recovered means something has returned to a higher level after a drop. Use this phrase to describe a rebound after a fall. For instance, the market recovered by the end of the year. Leveled off describes a trend that has stopped changing after a period of movement and has become flat. For example, after 2015, growth leveled off completely. When something peaked before declining, it reached a high point and then began to fall. Use this to describe a maximum followed by a drop, like, users peaked before declining sharply in 2021. A steady decline means something fell gradually and consistently. Use this to describe a slow, regular downward trend, such as, the town's population saw a steady decline. Experienced growth means something went through a period of increase. Use this when describing a period where something grew. For example, the sector experienced growth between 2010 and 2015. When something reached a low of, it has arrived at its minimum point. Use this to describe the lowest figure reached, like, exports reached a low of 500 tons in 2012. To vary considerably means to change a lot with no clear pattern. Use this to describe figures that changed widely over time. For example, rainfall varied considerably throughout the decade. A downward trend refers to an overall decrease over a period of time. Use this when describing a general falling pattern, such as, fuel use saw a downward trend after 2018. When a figure shows a slow, gentle increase over time, you can say it rose gradually. An example is, the population rose gradually each year. If you need to describe the bottom of a downward curve, use the phrase, hit a trough. For example, profits hit a trough in the third quarter. A slight fluctuation describes small, repeated up and down changes. It is useful for describing minor instability, like, there was a slight fluctuation in prices. When a value rose step by step in a reliable way, you can say it climbed steadily. For example, house prices climbed steadily over the decade. Use stabilised at to describe a figure that stopped changing and held steady at a certain level. For example, the rate stabilized at 4% after 2016. If a trend has generally moved higher over time, you can state that it, showed an upward trend. For example, tourism showed an upward trend until 2020. To describe a fast and noticeable decrease, use the phrase, dropped sharply. For example, sales dropped sharply in the final quarter. When a figure never changed throughout the period, you can say it remained constant. For instance, the temperature remained constant all day. You have now covered key terms to describe various trends. Keep practicing these terms to describe any chart in your writing with confidence.